Welcome to the creative community. I'm your host, David Starkey, and my guest this time is poet Scott Struman. Scott, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to talking with you. Our producer, Phil Taggart, has been talking about how incredible it was for you to be part of Joan Raymond's River Talk workshop. Is that kind of where you found your voice as a poet?
Yeah, I got really lucky. I was taking a poetry class at the Learning Tree University in Thousand Oaks with Joan, and at the end of the class, she invited me and two others to say, hey, come to our workshop in Ojai. We meet every Monday night, 9 months a year. And I went there for about 8 years, and it was a great crucible.
Life-changing, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, everyone should be as lucky as me, whether they meet a teacher in a creative writing class or in a workshop or who knows where.
So what was it about Joan that made her such a good teacher?
She sort of had a vision, and she stuck with it. You know, whether she was helping us edit or constructively criticizing us, she stuck to what she wanted, and through that, we got her point of view, and then eventually through that, we got our own point of view. Mm-hmm. And there were a lot of quality people in the group who, if you were off one week, they'd say, oh, usually you're okay. This week you shouldn't have come.
Right.
And but we were comfortable enough with each other that it was no big deal.
Mm-hmm. You just let that go over your back, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I really want to hear your poems. I know you've got some poems lined up for us. So what's the first poem that you're going to read for us?
This is like my signature poem. I lived in Camarillo for 10 years. It's called Johnny's Caffeine Addiction. Ready? Johnny's only time outside his Section 8 apartment is his paranoid trip to lunch at McDonald's, where he waits for all eyes upon him to disappear and grabs a cup of coffee in his plastic refill cup. But Johnny never pays. The manager knows. The cashiers know. But they allow Johnny to fly his magical airplane fueled by caffeine to the wildest of places. Africa's Mount Kilimanjaro, the Swiss Alps in Peru, the Grand Canyon and Stonehenge, all trips departing from where he sits, adjacent to the coffee maker.
So tell me about the origin of that poem. How did you come to write that?
Well, it's 99.9% true. Camarillo was an odd time in my life, and the only thrill of the day was to go to McDonald's and just drink excessive amounts of coffee and iced tea, and you'd see the manager would start looking at you in a dirty way, right, because he thinks you're drinking all his profits, and then you would in turn have to stay strong and not let his glares get to you.
Right.
Because he had no right to kick me out.
So Johnny is you, Scott.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about that. I mean, you said you were wanting to discuss a little bit about writing with mental illness or from mental illness, towards it, against it. How does that play into your writing process?
I took a lot of poetry classes around at different schools and UCLA Extension, and what are those big 3 words, 4 words? Write what you know. Mm-hmm. So as time went by, I realized that's the best way to go. Mm-hmm. Because what else can you write about? Mm-hmm. It was kind of great to relay my stories and my experience in this bizarre existence and try and relate them to other people who are occupying this planet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so, although I've never had that experience myself, now that I've lived it through your poem, I have had it, in a way.
Yeah.
Let's hear another poem.
Okay. I also spent 10, 12 years up in the mountains, in a place called Oakhurst, California, halfway between Fresno and Yosemite. This is a similar poem. It talks about going to a station in life and drinking. So this one's called Somewhere Between Fresno and Yosemite. couldn't be better for forcing me to stay healthy on a 1.2-mile walk from my house to the Chevron station, where I pick up mail from the rural outlet every day except Sunday. A 2.4-mile round trip home, but first I relax. A man named Jack operates the gas station convenience store I use as a cafe for drinking Diet Pepsi out of a 64-ounce mug. Refills only cost $1. Drinking and watching people drive on the car crash capital of the world, Highway 41, adorned with mountains, rivers, and trees. But I'm busy trying to understand this small foothill town's strange citizens while I hike across a bridge over a rain-filled river. A crazed driver in a GMC truck speeds towards the bridge and doesn't slow down. So I jump onto the railing of the bridge, knowing the trucker probably won't care if he kills me, and I doubt the local cops would really care if a college-educated city boy dishwasher is flattened dead into a pancake like all the giant toads who come out at night or in the rain, and tonight's drivers will crush more toads, eulogized by me with a, "Hi, Mr. Toad, I'm sorry you're dead."
That's a great ending. How do you know when a poem's over? Because that poem is a narrative poem. It's got a lot of stuff going on. It's got a great ending. When do you feel like, okay, this poem's done?
Well, after you do the real thing, the experience, going to the mail every single day for exercise and for kicking back and drinking Pepsi. Then you write about. Then I was in writing groups up there in the mountains, and they would help me shed any unnecessary words, and it was something I did every single day of the week. So it just came
It was just burned into what you experienced.
It was inscribed.
Yeah, but the
Live first.
Yeah. And the thing about writing the eulogies or elegies for the toads, that's a funny way to deal with a really frightening experience of almost getting run over by a semi. Yeah.
Yeah. As many laws as there are in Ventura, California, there were a lot less laws up in the mountains.
Yeah, yeah.
And these toads were like bigger than 1 foot. They were gigantic, and they made for unfortunate targets.
Right. Well, my cousins lived in O'Neill's. Do you know where that is? It's just down the road from Oakhurst. And it doesn't seem like a place that would necessarily have a lot of poets in it. But you say you had a whole writing group there.
Yeah, there was a lady there who had us up to her house every week. And that worked. And then there were a couple open mics throughout the town, mostly for music, but
sometimes for poetry.
The poets got to sneak in. I got to be part of this nice little community.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned in there, and I think your work is generally autobiographical. You mentioned being a college-educated dishwasher.
Yeah, I did not study dishwashing at college, but for better or for worse, it's kind of how I ended up.
And so, I mean, that gives you a kind of look into a world that a lot of poets don't have. I mean, it's an interesting and unusual perspective, I think.
Yeah, when I was up in the mountains, I worked at a resort for a couple of years, Friday and Saturday night, and there's only one thing that matters when it's icy and snowy outside. Inside, you're sweating, and there's a horrible rush. And all that matters is that you got to clean those dishes. I mean, if there's one little piece of food left on it, you haven't done your job.
Right, right. Well, and that's kind of an interesting metaphor for poetry itself. Where you're looking that carefully at every word, every period, every comma.
Yeah.
Let's keep the poems coming. What's the next one you've got for us?
Okay, this one is if I can say it in French, coup de grace. Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Okay, and I went to move to Israel about 20 years ago, and didn't work out. So, but there were positive aspects to it. So this one's called "How Far Up Is Aliyah?" Depression flies me to chance a new life, dishwashing in the Negev desert at Kibbutz Keturah, where my prospects for a smooth landing too quickly crash, thanks to side effects from Prozac, Seroquel, Wellbutrin, and Klonopin, in a mixed-up world where I begin to drop far too many dishes, which always shatter, and suddenly I'm waiting in Keturah's grape fields for a fast return bus ride to Ben Gurion Airport and a sad El Al flight home away from Israel. But I'll never forget the two Negev lizards, both Jewish I assume, who ate my Prozac and said in English under a burning sky, "You should try peyote." And, you know, I was sad to be leaving, but, you know, I had this little moment with these two little creatures running around.
Yeah. Well, that, I mean, you know, that you're talking about all the medications that you're taking there. That's a lot to sort of negotiate, right?
Yeah, you, the word hallucinations enters your vocabulary a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's hear another poem.
Okay. I took a class at Moore Park College last semester, and teacher was really good, and so you know, I wrote this one in that class. It's called, and it was based on a dream. It's called Another Weird Dream About My Dad. Every night around midnight, my dad drives from Santa Monica to my apartment in Simi Valley, where he enters my bedroom, uninvited, to wake me up and throw me into the back seat of his convertible, along with my cousin Rob, a lawyer, my cousin Mark, a social worker, and a nameless employee from the neighborhood Starbucks, who strangely sits in the front seat as we drive to the Mojave Desert to look for arrowheads. It's cold outside. Rain starts to fall heavy from the night sky as we arrive at a hopefully positive space off the main highway. I beg my dad to grab us a room at Motel 6 not far away in California City, but he insists that we rough it in the outdoors because he is a survivor. Polio nearly took his life many years ago. The kid from Starbucks asked me how I obtained my Costco credit card, but I tell him to figure it out by himself as I step blindly in the dark where I find two green frogs swimming in a rising river. And with some help from my flashlight, I capture them. These frogs bring me companionship, but my dad lectures me about the frogs' needs for independence, similar to his speeches about why he raised me without any guidance, so I set the frogs free and they hop away. Now without my frogs, I sit soaked in the car, wet and confused. Everyone else is sleeping. I think about asking my dad to pretend he's normal.
That is a great last line. So there comes our frogs back in. We have the toads in the previous poem.
These reptiles and amphibians just seem to keep hopping in the poems. I can't get away from them.
Well, what is that? What, I mean, is it just a sort of connection, you feel?
As a kid, the best experiences of my childhood was me, my dad, my cousin, my uncle. We'd go to Mojave Desert like 20 times a year and camp. And living in the San Fernando Valley in Northridge was a pain. It was, a harassment. But going out to Mojave was great, and there were, rattlesnakes and desert iguanas. This was way before the motorcycle people took over, and there was so much wildlife.
Right.
It was amazing.
So you're going from this kind of really conventional suburban area into this place that's entirely different.
Yeah, for me it wasn't really fairly conventional. It was more like a madhouse.
Okay.
And so the desert brought some really good calm.
You know, you've been talking a little bit about you were at this workshop. You did Joan Raymond's River Talk workshop. You were talking about the workshop in Oakhurst, and I'm curious. So just say somebody's watching and they're like, "Oh man, I've always wanted to write poetry, but I don't know how to get started." And I hear this a lot from people who don't necessarily want to take a city college class, but want to study with somebody. How do you find these places? How does that? How did you find the one in Oakhurst? How did you hear about that?
Well, there was an open mic at at a coffee shop. A lot of people played guitar. A lot of people did humorous skits, and then poems were okay. And so word got around that there was this guy reading poems at the coffee shop, and then word got back to me that there was a lady up in the mountains who was leading a poetry writing group.
Just word of mouth.
Word of mouth.
Yeah. How did you hear about Joan's workshop?
Oh, that was really plain old luck.
Okay.
When I was at that school, the Learning Tree, kind of a corrupt organization, if you've heard of it. But you know, she rescued the three of us out of it.
Right. Yeah.
Took us up to Ojai.
And then the class you were just mentioning, the college class at Moore Park?
Last semester I took a creative writing class at Moore Park, short stories and poems, and it's my first like academic class in a million years. And you know, when the teacher says turn in 10 new poems, you got to turn in 10 new poems.
Right.
And you can't, you know, then you can't spend the rest of the day just hanging around with your cat.
You have to write the
watching
poems.
South Park reruns.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
What about? I'm curious about your reading, because you are a poet who has a really kind of colloquial style, really direct. Are there poets that you've read who've influenced you over the course of your career? Who?
Well, when I started with Joan in Thousand Oaks and then Ojai, she was really free verse, totally free verse. And at the time, I thought, you know, I'm against everything, so I'm going to be free verse too, because I'm against everything.
Right. You don't want to write rhymes and stuff like that.
No way. But I've had a big change of heart. The free verse has served me really well. No complaints. It's been great. But right now I'm taking another class at Moore Park, and it's all academic, and it's, you know, the greats, the great poets. Shakespeare, Emily Dickinson, Robert Frost, and, you know...
Is that inspiring you to write?
Those guys are great. They're amazing. I mean, these guys, like, they must have lived and breathed and eaten and drank, you know, grammar as if, you know, like some people brush their hair.
Right.
And, you know, my utmost respect to those guys who...
Have you started writing rhyming poetry or anything like that?
Every now and then I write a formal poem, you know, like a cinquain or a...
Right.
What are the other ones?
Something pretty short.
Yeah, haikus. And I try for rhymes more, but I don't think I'll ever be able to come anywhere near those guys.
Sure. Who will? Yeah, nobody.
Yeah, but it's been great getting to know them.
Let's go. We had about 9 minutes left in the show, so I think I'd love to hear another poem.
Okay. This one is called Confusion in the Desert, Part 1, written up in Oakhurst. A jail built around me with a little help from Cal, my architect dad, and 2 cement engineers who build and design my igloo trap, made not from ice but of red bricks to match my toilet, a pale painted red. 3 steel bars in all 4 windows do nothing to block the sun. Endless amounts of desert where nothing changes until morning when Sheriff Tom Smith arrives on a moped to wake me up with his portable siren, blasting and shattering any chance of peace in this part of the desert. But today, Sheriff Tom is hauling a horse trailer populated by my parents, both laughing, who kindly bring a diary for me to capture my feelings about a great escape from this idiotic jail that never happens. And the next day, Sheriff Tom returns to hook his moped onto the horse trailer where my parents, still laughing, throw walnuts at me. And I ask Sheriff Tom, of what crime am I guilty? And Sheriff Tom says, stop analyzing everything.
Is that based on a true story?
No, I've never been in a portable prison in the middle of the desert. My parents have never ridden in horse trailers.
But I mean, it's not based on a childhood experience that was similar to that.
Oh, every day of my existence is similar to that. You know,
How so? Explain that.
Someone throws pies at you from every direction of the room.
Right.
Then you clean it off a little.
Right.
Say, why'd you guys do that?
Yeah.
And they'll say, stop analyzing everything.
Right.
Loosen up, guy.
Right. But in that case, I mean, I obviously know your parents didn't haul you around in a little portable jail, but did you feel that way?
Oh yeah, yeah, it still does. You know, whether it's noon or midnight, I'm cruising around in a little jail, and I gotta be cool. I gotta maintain.
Yeah.
Make the most of it.
And what happens if you don't?
You don't want to
You
know.
don't want to know.
Well, you end up doing a lot of activities that are not positive.
Okay.
You know, years go by and you start doing some weird things and you go, oops, you know.
Right. So it's important to just, like you said, maintain. Maintain's the word.
Yeah, you gotta maintain.
Yeah. Let's hear another poem. People are joining us. We've got about 6 minutes left. We're listening to the poems of Scott Struman. And so, Scott, what have you got for us now?
Okay, this one is, I spent a year in Van Nuys in a Section 8 apartment with 2 guys. Very strange experience. We had some fun. We didn't have some fun also. So one night, one of my roommates took all his meds, and he threatened to kill me, and then he tried to kill himself, and then police and ambulance, everybody came. So I moved out like that because it was the joke's over. It's no fun anymore. And so I call this poem Too Many Days Without Prozac. Calling my ex-roommate at Section 8 housing in Van Nuys to find any important mail, especially a shipment of my psychotropic meds, which have yet to arrive at my new address in Camarillo. I wait for William, my roommate, to speak. He's a former tree service guy from high up in the trees. He fell down about 50 feet twice, once in a suicide attempt. The second time his support belt snapped, leaving him with brain damage. Sometimes we would go to liquor stores to buy non-alcoholic beer and drink excessively in the parking lots within view of various LAPD officers who stared at us not very amused, usually on Saturday mornings. Before William can say hello, he drops his cell phone upon the hardwood floor of the public housing unit, so I say, ouch, loudly, and follow that by telling him I am trapped inside his phone, suffering from multiple broken bones which anger him, so he calls me crazy and asks me what I'm talking about. He says, you don't live in the phone. I say, I can live wherever I want. You have no right to tell me where I can and cannot spend my time. I hear him walking away, saying, stop driving me insane, which leaves me alone, trapped in a bizarre universe.
Yeah, I mean...
That's how it ended.
That's how it ended.
Yeah.
And you're talking about maintain. There's also a sense like that you, the poet, and you, Scott, are, you got to stand up for yourself too, right? I mean, because otherwise people are going to impinge on it.
Yeah.
On yourself.
This country is a free-for-all.
You have to do what you have to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. We got about 4 minutes left. How many poems left do you have? Just
have one.
Just one.
It's cute.
Yeah. Well, before we go to that one, I mean, is there other advice you would give to poets out there? How you've managed to take your life and turn it into poetry. How can they do that too?
Well, in my younger days, I played drums in a couple garage bands, and I'd write the lyrics, and I'd let the singers sing them, so it doesn't have to reflect on me.
Right.
Then I could put Scotch tape over my mouth and just happily play drums.
Right.
It was great. But for a lot of reasons, none of these bands ever worked out. Social skills are tough, and so it seemed the bands disappeared, and I kind of ended up in my room drinking stimulants and writing poems.
Right. So it's just you got to do it. Even if someone else is the reader of it, you have to get it down on paper. And then when there's like I went to the Ventura readings with Phil Taggart for about 8 years, once a week, pretty much, and it was a great outlet to go there once a week and read poems to people, and
Sometimes they'd frown and sometimes they'd clap.
Well, let's hear this one. We just got a couple minutes left.
Okay. It's another nature poem. It's called Away from the People Who Never Stop Asking. Thanks to a season's extra rain and snow is a river deep green, waves flowing fast. Waters I watch daily as my brain damaged fights to erase my joy, so to my brain I say stop, here in nature's beauty, underneath a giant bridge that hosts a busy highway and noise to drive me mad, but down here I remain, now in a river-fed pond, an offshoot sparkling blue, where I chat with the locals. Hopping frogs laughing, salamanders smiling, lizards doing push-ups all day on granite rocks. And we all crack jokes, and nobody ever asks me why I don't have a job.
That's great to have those little lizards. And
They don't care. They don't say, you know, you went to college, why aren't you working?
They're just accepting. Yeah.
Yeah, we're on kind of the same wavelength.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's been a real pleasure to hear your poem, Scott. Thank you so very much for being on the show.
Oh, great. Thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
The Creative Community is a co-production of TVSB in Santa Barbara and Caps Media here in Ventura. In Ventura, the show is produced by Phil Taggart and his fantastic crew. I'm your host, David Starkey, and we'll see you next time.